I think prison reform is something that we regularly get wrong. We get it wrong when we're thinking about it, we get it wrong in practice, and it's been going on for so long, we ought to have started to get it right, but I don't think we have. It goes all the way back to the late 18th century, and the movement has been shaped by various reformers, legislative changes, and shifts in social attitude towards punishment and rehabilitation. Key figures like John Howard, who's the fellow up at the top, that side, there we are, up at the top over there, and the other person is Elizabeth Fry, who used to appear on the banknotes. And modern reformers like Rory Stewart have played pivotal roles in the evolution of this thought. And we still haven't got there, and at the moment the prisons are full. John Howard, who died in 1790, was the High Sheriff of Bedfordshire and is often considered one of the earliest prison reformers. His inspection of prisons revealed appalling conditions, leading to his call for significant change. He wrote a book called The State of the Prisons in England and Wales in 1777, and he highlighted the unsanitary conditions, the lack of proper food, the inadequate separation of prisoners by gender and offence. And he laid the groundwork for future reform by bringing public attention to the appalling state of the prisons. Basically, the idea was out of sight, out of mind, just put them away. Elizabeth Fry, who was a Quaker philanthropist, took up this idea. In 1813, she visited Newgate Prison and was horrified by the conditions, particularly for the female prisoners, and her efforts to improve the conditions of the women, advocating for better hygiene, better education, the separation of male and female prisoners. Her work led to the 1825 Jails Act, which implemented some of these reforms, including the appointment of female warders for female prisoners. Robert Peel took up her ideas, and he introduced the Jails Act. And Peel, of course, is the person who introduces the first idea of police on the streets, improving sanitation, ensuring proper food and clothing. But the reforms weren't effectively enforced, and although they represented a shift in the way government viewed prisons and to be more humane, the practice in the prisons was still harsh. The construction of new prisons such as Pentonville in 1842 reflected a growing belief in the possibility of reform, and the new designs of prisons emphasized solitary confinement and reflection, under the assumption that isolation would lead to repentance and rehabilitation. But now, of course, it's extraordinarily ironic that that's what happened to Julian Assange. Isolation leads to isolation. Throughout the mid-19th century, the British prison system continued to evolve with the construction of more prisons, the introduction of inspectors, who were tasked with ensuring that reforms were implemented. That's an important reform in itself. But there was still considerable debate about the effectiveness of these reforms, and while some argued that they were too lenient, others believed that the harsh conditions such as prolonged solitary confinement was inhumane and counterproductive. And Samuel Romilly was another figure during this period, advocating for the abolition of the death penalty for minor crimes. Romilly's work indirectly supported prison reform by emphasizing the need for a more just and humane penal system, and his efforts led to the gradual reduction of capital crimes and an increased reliance on imprisonment as a form of punishment. The early 20th century saw the introduction of the Borstal system, a type of reformatory for young offenders, and the Borstal system focused on education, vocational training, rehabilitation, reflecting a shift from punishment to reform. The period also saw the diversification of penal approaches with the introduction of probation and the transformation of facilities for women prisoners. Throughout the 20th century, British prisons continued to undergo modernisation. And in a sense, if you look at where they came from, yes, there has been a great reformation. but not enough. The introduction of scientific management, professional expertise, localism, ensuring that prisons are built in such a place that prisoners' families can reach the prisons to visit their loved ones. Rehabilitation became a central goal, with programs aimed at addressing the root causes of criminal behaviour. However, despite these goals, overcrowding and inadequate conditions, the lack of staff, presented additional challenges and meant that a lot of the programs couldn't be implemented. Rory Stewart's tenure as Minister of State for Prisons in 2018 marked a renewed focus on prison reform in the 21st century. Stewart advocated for reducing violence in prisons, shortening prison sentences for less serious offences, emphasising rehabilitation over incarceration, but he was going against the grain of the movement in the last 10 years, which has been to push prisoners into prison because of reforms in the legal system, which allows judges to impose a sentence and effectively probation at the same time, rather than to see the offenders kept in the community and avoiding prison sentence. So lots of prisoners being put into prisons for short-term periods. And Rory Stewart also proposed the construction of new prisons, the modernisation of existing facilities to address overcrowding and improve conditions. He was particularly concerned about the code and about the fact that so many windows were broken. His approach introduced the principle of the development of family units at prisons, like Huntercombe and Garth, aimed at strengthening family ties of prisoners as part of their rehabilitation process. But his plans for a new super secure prison was halted due to concerns about cost and design. Despite these setbacks, Stewart's efforts reflect a broader trend towards more humane and rehabilitative approaches within the British penal system, reflecting the impact of the prison systems on the continent, particularly in the Netherlands and Sweden. Contemporary prison reform in the UK continues to grapple with long-standing issues such as overcrowding, mental health needs, and the balance between punishment and rehabilitation. The construction of new super and mega prisons has sparked debate about the best way to address these challenges. And while some argue that more prisons are necessary to reduce overcrowding, others believe that the focus should be on reducing the prison population through alternative sentencing and improved rehabilitation programs. The history of British prison reform is marked by significant achievements as well as ongoing challenges. From the pioneering efforts of John Howard and Elizabeth Fry in the 18th and 19th centuries to the modern reforms advocated by Rory Stewart, the British penal system has undergone substantial change. But the fundamental dilemmas of punishment versus rehabilitation and the need for more humane conditions is central to any ongoing evolution in the system, and must be central to the question about whether or not there's enough space to put offenders. As the UK continues to reform prisons in the 21st century, the lessons of the past are crucial in shaping a more just and effective penal system for the future.